to the Unpacked podcast. I am Mickey O'Neill. I am your host today, and I am joined by our superintendent of Ingham ISD, Jason Mellema.
Hello. So glad to be back here unpacking educational topics with you today.
Well, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Today we want to talk a little bit about special education. Many people don't truly understand what special education is and the broad scope of needs for our students. Can you share the 13 disabilities that are covered under special education and maybe how some of the services vary?
Sure. So special education, pretty large topic when we think about the depth and breadth of what's going on, but let me kind of hit on those 13 service areas that are recognized underneath the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, more commonly known as IDEA. And they are autism spectrum disorder, known as ASD, physical impairments, cognitive impairments, severe multiple impairments, deaf blindness, specific learning disabilities, deaf or hard of hearing, speech and language impairments, early childhood developmental delays, traumatic brain injuries, emotional impairments, visual impairments, or otherwise health impairments. So 13 different areas that are recognized at this point in time. And when I mention IDEA, IDEA is the law that kind of governs and gives us an understanding of best practices when it comes to how do we provide supports for those students with disabilities. The origins of it actually date back to 1975 when the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was approved, and then in 1990 it was actually reauthorized as IDEA. And so that's the overall governing structure when we think about special education. There are other laws that have come in, for example, ADA and other factors that have come in since that point in time, but the origins of making sure that we had the right types of educational supports for students with disabilities come to us in the main process of IDEA.
Okay. Can you share a little bit about the learning environment for students and what we hear this term least restrictive environment is and how that helps support our student learning?
For sure. So before I jump into least restrictive environment, known as LRE, let me kind of hit on a topic known as FAPE, free and appropriate public education. So within inside IDEA is the concept of making sure that we provide FAPE, an appropriate public education for our students with disabilities. If we're providing FAPE, part of that then comes to us within the least restrictive environment. In other words, we're not putting students with disabilities into environments that are more restrictive than what they need. At its best, we're trying to make sure that students are being served with their neurotypical peers. So when we go back to those 13 disability areas that are recognized, most of the students there with the right levels of supports can stay inside their local school district and be provided services in tandem with educational classes that are provided with their neurotypical peers. There are students that might need some pull-out supports with a resource room. There are students that might need push-in supports with a parapro that's helping to keep them on point, or providing supports with respect to reading or different concepts. Those are your typical, when we think about special education services, those are your typical special education services that we think about that happen inside our schools. The next step beyond that might be more of some regional programming. So we think about LRE, the least restrictive environment with their peers. The next restrictive environment, that whole spectrum we look at, again, those regional programs. That might be a student who's going to a program more regionally, as in, it might be the district next door, and they are going to be in a classroom with other students who might have some similar challenges, might have some similar identifications of their disabilities, some similar goals that are outlined in their IEPs. And they're going to be in the class with neurotypical peers part of the day, but they're going to spend more time with respect to inside those classrooms that are specially provided for students with those types of disabilities. Then the next level of restrictive environment is more of like a center-based school. And that is a school that doesn't have students with neurotypical behaviors and abilities. It is a school for those students who have otherwise challenges, disabilities, and need very specialized supports. So, for example, Beekman and Heartwood are examples here within Ingham ISD of schools in which students attend, but they are students that have pretty severe disabilities. It is the most restrictive environment from where schools are at. Beyond that is really not school-based services, but something that would be where if they need to be hospitalized into a clinical setting, which actually is beyond where schools have the ability. We don't run clinical settings. But that's why looking at the least restrictive environment, we are trying to assist local districts, look at rubrics, look at data, and figure out what is the best way we can provide services for students in the least restrictive environment. And that's a challenge. It's not an easy one-size-fits-all approach. You have to look at the data for each student individually, look at the services the schools have, and then try to make the best pairings. So pretty big topic, tough one to tackle.
Yeah. So just to summarize a little bit, I'd say, and you can clarify this, but the local districts, students can go into the local classroom with their peers. They could have built-in supports, or they could be pulled out for supports like OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language supports. Then you've got where you've got some specialized programming in our local districts, and students go to those specialized programs. It could be a kid from Williamston that goes to Dansville because they have a support there that's needed, and it's a smaller classroom where they receive additional supports. Or you have the center-based type programs that ISDs operate where they have higher needs. And those are kind of the three things that schools function under.
Absolutely. And so that's important to note, right? Like, how do we set the structures up to make sure that kids are getting the appropriate education, FAPE, but done so in an environment that is the least restrictive? That's the challenge.
Right. To make sure that they have everything they need and they can still grow socially with their peers as much as possible.
Right. Exactly.
Fantastic. So maybe add a little bit about what is an IEP. We talk about that a lot, and it just kind of a little vocabulary lessons for people who aren't in the education world. We can talk in a future episode in depth about what an IEP is versus a 504 plan and how those support kids. But maybe just for today's podcast to help people understand what an IEP is and how that drives their education.
Sure. So an IEP is an individualized education plan that is specific to a student. As I mentioned earlier, there are 13 different disability areas. If a student qualifies underneath one of those 13 disability areas, then an IEP is drawn up, and that is in consultation with parents, that is in consultation with general education teachers, and that's in consultation with special education staff. So they get together, they sit down, and they talk about how do we craft the right types of supports for the needs of this specific student, thinking about what's the appropriate public education that they need. And so that is as individualized as every student that we serve. So for some students, it could be minimal amounts, right? They might need 30 minutes of additional speech and language support every 2 weeks, right? So that might be the appropriate spot for one student. For another student, it might be that they're going to need to be pulled out of a classroom with their neurotypical peers, and they're going to be in a resource room 2 hours a day, which is pretty small numbers of students. So a student to staff ratio is set up to where staff can provide some very direct, more typically like you see 5-7 kids type in a classroom. They're sitting down with them, they're working through things, and they're modifying some of the curriculum to make sure the students can assist it, right? So it all depends on the kid. That's the beauty of an IEP, is it allows us to provide the right types of levels of support.
A really focused individual attention that they need.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think that's all we have time for, but we appreciate you helping us unpack the challenges and the realities in our public education system.
And we look forward to catching you next time when we unpack it.